Welcome to
That's High Praise,
a Nicolas Cage podcast.
I am your host, V.H.Zest.
And I am your other co-host, Captain Nostalgia, back in the saddle.
Literally the saddle. Literally the saddle. That's right. So it is, as we speak, the day before Nicolas Cage's birthday. Yeah, so very excited. Stoked to celebrate him, his birthday, his new movie,
The Old Way.
The Old Way. Man,
which,
wow.
I have to preface this and say that it is singular because there is a horror movie called The Old Ways, which Biscayne got a chance to sit down and interview the writer for that, who also ironically worked on The Muppets. Great guy. Great episode. Go check it out.
The range that the Muppets have, it's amazing.
Just go from talking about witchcraft to the Muppets.
Yeah, so anyway, The Old Way, not The Old Ways, which The Old Ways is oddly, ominous. It's so cool. The Old Way just sounds like...
It's a great movie.
Sounds like a thing. Anyway, yeah, so this is... Okay. Basically, the billboard splash for this is that this is Nicolas Cage's first Western. Josh, will you weigh in on that notion?
Yeah, so this is his first Western, and this is like a who's who of characters, actors coming together for a revenge classic shoot 'em up.
Yeah, pretty much. We missed the very, very beginning, so I don't know, and maybe at the very beginning they didn't even say, but I'm not sure what year or what state this takes place in. I know it's probably 1800s because they said that they're states now, and it looks fairly 1800s, but they don't declare territory or anything. The accents they leave a little to be desired, so they're not really helpful for nailing anything down. But yeah, so it's a Western. It's a modern movie, and it feels that way, but it's a Western.
So I guess before we start this and kind of sharing our spoiler-free thoughts, because we got to see this in theaters, and it is going to be available for those of you guys that do not have this playing in theaters because it's limited engagement. It will be on VOD and digital later this month, I believe the 20th, if I remember correctly, which is about 2 weeks. But let's discuss our viewpoints on Westerns, because I think that's going to impact this conversation quite a lot.
Okay, yeah, and I knew we would need to do that. So I am not a fanatic when it comes to Westerns by any means, but I did grow up with some Westerns here and there. A little bit of John Wayne, a little bit of... Mostly, really, my influence for Westerns is that I grew up watching the black and white Zorro show that they used to show on Disney at midnight. So that's my biggest frame of reference for Westerns, and the occasional John Wayne movie, True Grit, El Dorado, whatever. I'm not one of those Clint Eastwood's the best actor kind of guys, although Gran Torino is a top-notch film. Yeah. I've watched movies that I think more so I've watched movies that are Western adjacent. So Back to the Future 3, if you will, stuff like that.
Also, are we counting I think my version of Westerns would be I guess spaghetti Westerns. So
over the top kind of
Star Wars, Mandalorian, stuff like that.
I would definitely consider Mandalorian a Western easily. I would consider A New Hope a Western, but not any of the other Star Wars films.
Sure.
Yeah, so that makes sense. That makes sense.
My biggest love of Western would probably be the Buck McCoy episode of The Simpsons.
Sure.
But other than that, I grew up, my grandfather was really big into John Wayne and Clint Eastwood. I remember growing up watching Westerns with him. I couldn't tell you any of them because
there's so many.
There's so many of them. And Westerns were one of those genres that as much as I've tried it to get into, they've just never appealed to me.
Sure.
And I don't know if it's just because I'm not a history fanatic or...
Do you like period pieces?
I don't like period pieces.
I did not know that. Okay.
So that's also
I'm taken aback.
That's also kind of one of the things that I think we went into this like completely different because like I've tried over the years like being a cinephile, being more mature in like my palette for film to be like I want to, this new Western looks good. So like when Chris Pratt and Denzel Washington did the Magnificent Seven, I think it was what it's
fantastic
called.
movie, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, all right, like I'll check it out. And I was kind of like, it's entertaining. Like it's okay. It is what it is.
Sure.
And
Wild Wild West.
Yeah, we don't have to talk about that.
There's a particular reason we don't talk about Wild Wild West on this Nicolas Cage podcast.
Yeah. Go check out our episode on the death of Superman. What happened? So like for me, like I've tried and like I've never been impressed by Westerns. Like they're one of those, it's like that genre that like I feel like it has like promise in the beginning and then that promise slowly fades. Yeah. Until like I just get like really tired of it by like the start of the third act.
Sure. I think from what people have really pointed out to me about Westerns is that they are to be they're to be dialogue light. And that's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a lot of dialogue, because there is, but the dialogue tends to not drive the story.
Sure.
In like classic Westerns. This movie is in no way like that. I think dialogue plays a pretty good part. Yeah. It has a more it feels like a modern film despite its genre.
So like with the dialogue of this movie, like having we were talking about this on the way to the theater, but I've seen The Whale now twice. I've read the play that the movie is based on, and like just the dialogue. So like having that frame of reference fresh in my mind, like I feel like the dialogue of this movie feels almost kind of like adjacent to a stage play.
Okay, interesting.
And like just some of the sequences and like the scenes, like the way it's set up, especially in the beginning where everything's a lot more like monotoned, and then you get into the road trip portion of it, like the travel portion of it, and I feel like it kind of like gets a little bit less and less, and then you have like the campfire scene between like Cage and his daughter.
Oh, and it's just dialogue.
It's just dialogue, But like I think that those are the moments that this movie really shine, and so like I'll show my hands early and like spoiler-free thoughts on this. I thought if there's any, I came into this movie dreading it.
Okay. Wow.
Because I am not a Western guy.
I feel like we haven't done that before.
Like I said, I just every Western I've seen has let me down, and of course, the one Western that like is actually gonna like hook me, make me laugh, draw me to the edge of my seat is gonna be Nicolas Cage.
Sure. So before we get too far into the movie, and before we get too far off the topic of Westerns. I want to just state this thought. This is an opinion of mine. Thus, I'm wrong, according to the internet. Can't have opinions on the internet.
Wait, is this a hot take?
I don't think so. Personally, I don't really think so. But I don't think this is Nicolas Cage's first Western. I don't consider it to be his first Western. I think that...
Okay, I know where this is going.
So I think that, like, sure, stylistically, you got horses, you got revolvers, you got wide brim hats, etc., that kind of thing. Sure. Okay, if that's your definition of a Western, which is fine. I'm not saying that's an incorrect definition, but if that is your definition, then this is his first Western. Cool. But if your definition of a Western is the way that a story is, it is the scenery, it is the West, it's dry, desert, very lived in, dirty, things like that. But if it's also like the way the story is told, the way the story plays out, large sequences of no dialogue, etc., I think Raising Arizona is Nicolas Cage's first Western. And that's really early on in Cage's career.
Absolutely.
And again, please disagree with me, whatever. Maybe I don't have room to talk about Westerns because I didn't really cut my teeth on them, and that's true and that's fair. So, but that's just kind of where I land in regards to him doing Westerns. And I just wanted to get that out there.
Well, also, like, I think it was a great episode we did. It was one of our very first episodes.
It was.
So go check it out in our very own podcast feed now.
Yeah.
And I guess before we get into this movie, just shout out to the man himself, because today is his birthday, the day that this episode is dropping.
Yep.
Which seems very fitting because I think this is like. So let's jump into spoiler-free thoughts.
Sure. Overall?
Overall.
Cool.
I think this movie, it has some campy narrative, or not narrative, I guess. Like, there are some, like, lines that are, like, delivered that you can tell is on the campier side. Like, and I have some problems with the acting in this.
Me too.
Not from Cage.
Me either.
But I think it's a really strong movie.
Sure. I think that, like, if you're into Westerns, this will probably disappoint you.
Yeah, okay, all right. I wasn't sure where you were going with that.
If you're into Westerns, this movie would probably disappoint you. If you stylistically like cowboys or the West or whatever, maybe you'll have fun with this movie. That's fine. I did. I don't disagree with you on the campiness, but I think it came down to characters, not overall.
No, yeah. That's another, like, clarification I want to say. Is like,
totally.
It's like the campiness is like,
yeah,
it's very sporadic. It's not something that's like woven in. Like, there are just lines that, like, you could tell weren't meant to be cheesy, but the way that they're like delivered,
yeah,
or like the way that they fit into the context of the scene, like I caught me laughing.
But then there are like on the same at the same time though, there are like beautiful stoic mic drop moments.
Oh. Yes.
And like, yeah. So personally, I think the writing is fine. I would not fault this movie on writing. I don't think it's amazing. I don't think it's groundbreaking, but I think it's well written. I think the pacing of the movie works really well. Westerns don't tend to be as short as this movie is, and I think this movie like tells its story with enough brevity, not too much brevity, and it doesn't waste your time. I thought the pacing was great.
Yeah.
I think that the character development is played out very well. I think that the scenery, not sets, scenery is beautiful, and I've really got it. Like, I know I'm always this guy when we talk about these movies, but I love the score. I thought the score was great. It had like some really modern dramatic sort of sequences where needed, but then plenty of other sequences where it was just like, we got mandolin and banjo and we're going to town, and I thought it was really fitting and really fun. And you didn't really get a lot of that in old Westerns. You got like slide guitar and stuff like that. So for this movie to have a more like Appalachian folky kind of score, I thought was really fitting and a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up this score, because we pulled out of the theater and I was like, that was the thing I wanted to listen to, and I was so upset that Spotify didn't have this score.
Well, I mean, it's debut day, but
sure. And like, I guess like that's the problem with like seeing these like new releases, is like I gotta wait like a couple months, even if it does, because this is a small movie, so like, I don't know if it will. But yeah, I agree. I think that was kind of the thing that I really liked about the fact that this is a Western but doesn't feel like a Western.
Yeah.
Because of its length, because of the way that it's structured, because of the score.
Yeah, and it's dialogue. I would say it's dialogue driven, which is not always characteristic of Western.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of like a weird comparison to make, but the score a little bit, you brought up like the fact that it's like Appalachian.
Yeah.
And I really liked that. Like, it has that like folky twist,
yeah.
and it kind of reminds me like growing up and watching the way that like Rugrats episodes would like tackle the West.
Yeah.
And it kind of had that like that folky twist to where like it didn't feel like a John Wayne movie, but it felt like how like kids
it's playful.
Playful, exactly.
Yeah,
and I think it really worked for this scene, but I think also too there are like some emotional mic drops, like you said, and I think this score matches those really well.
Yeah. If we're gonna say anything good about this movie, it's gonna be about the score.
Yeah.
Yeah. Overall criticisms before we like really get into it.
So I have a love-hate relationship with the young lady that played the daughter.
Fascinating. I did not think. Okay.
So Ryan Kira Armstrong, she also brought to life last year. the titular character in the remake of Firestarter. And her chemistry with Zac Efron, I was like, all right, like I really feel like their emotional connection. It's okay. Like I thought she was probably one of the better parts of that movie. And here, like I had a love-hate relationship with her because I felt like there were moments where she like I wasn't moved by her.
Wow.
And then she had that then she had that like that mic drop moment where she turns to Cage and she's like asking him about like the marshal said that you used to kill men. Is that true? So he's like starting to like retell this story about like how he basically like met her mother and like everything changed for him.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that more. But like that moment of like her like describing the feeling of like understanding the fact that she would never see her mother again. Like that was the moment where I was like, oh man, like okay, this girl can act.
Yeah, if any character develops in this movie at all, it is her, and it does it well.
Yeah.
My biggest criticism with this movie is the sets, and I can't overstate that at all.
Yeah.
Yes, because like from the very beginning with their house, their store. I mean, if you look in onto a town and it's all like clapboard kind of, you know, barn raised sort of like shops and stuff, that's fine. I don't think any of that looked bad, but everything looked tooled and machined. Nothing looked dirty. Nothing looked lived in. The movie was basically not immersive at all unless they were on like the traveling scenes, because then they're just in nature. So I like, to me, like growing up, like having seen a couple of John Wayne Westerns and things like that, like people don't have nice teeth, let alone do they have like a retainer in, like one of the guys did, you know, like stuff like that. And I realize that like I might be nitpicking here, but like there are sci-fis with impossible things that we can't do that feel like lived in immersive worlds. So a movie about the Old West, which is just a period piece about a time in America where things are simple, should feel that way.
Yeah.
And it didn't. And I think that is my biggest criticism with the whole movie, is that it didn't feel cheap. It actually felt too expensive.
Interesting. Okay. See, like I didn't have that complaint. I feel like the reason that I don't have that complaint, is because like I don't remember watching a lot of those kind of like films growing up. Like I know I watched them with my grandfather, but I again couldn't tell you details.
Yeah.
It's like a blur.
Sure.
So for that one, but for like two, like I feel like it's not really like I don't want to say like a valid complaint, because it feels like the majority of this movie takes place on the road.
It
at
does.
least the important stuff takes place.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And that's my biggest criticism, if I have to have one. I didn't love the color palette either. I feel like Westerns should be like beige and orange, grittier, and brown. And this color palette was just like, oh, everything's pretty and clear as day. Like it wasn't Marvel bad, but like it was just a little too modern. That's all.
Yeah, it's very bright.
Yeah,
it's very vibrant.
Yeah.
And you know, it's funny. Before we started recording, we were talking about Ari Aster movies, and the reason when you look at like Hereditary to Midsommar, you have that like tonal shift, because Hereditary has a lot of like darker colors, and it like most of it takes place at night, and like it has a warmer palette. Then you look at like Midsommar, and Midsommar it's very bright.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of the contrast you expected from this, to where like you expected it to be like this darker, grittier tone.
Yeah.
And it just kind of ends up being this like very like alive, very subsequent film, which feels weird, not only for a movie that is a Western, but also a movie that is a revenge film, a movie that is dealing with grief and loss, and talking to your children about like death.
Yeah.
So like you have like all of these like this heaviness, and then like you also have these like subgenres that combine in this film that feel like it should look a lot dirtier than it does.
Yeah, sometimes in a movie you want a juxtaposition of like beauty and chaos. This was not one of those movies, but you had it anyway, and it didn't make sense almost. I wonder what it would be like to like get the movie on tape. Get the movie on tape, pop it in, and like maybe on a tube TV, but maybe even not. Pop it in on a tape and like adjust your color settings so that it's like warm and more monochrome.
Yeah.
I wonder it would be like if the movie would feel different, better, more authentic, etc. if you just kind of color edited it yourself on your TV and went from there.
Well, also it's weird because like we praise the score for like how whimsical it feels at times, but it does carry that emotional gravity that it does
when
need
it needs to.
When it needs to.
Yeah.
But I also think that like because it has that whimsical nature and it does feel very folky, I feel like it lends into that that position of it being a brighter film, like more hopeful film than it probably like doesn't need to be.
It doesn't need exactly. Yeah, that's true. But somehow the score works.
Yeah,
and I don't know.
Well, so
but it was scene by scene, and scene by scene, it was very, very good.
So let's jump into.
You can't really do color palette scene by scene.
Yeah, so let's jump into spoilers because I feel like this movie.
Yeah,
you definitely need to talk about spoilers. I am really dying to talk about some of the other actors in this movie. I think we talk about Nick Cage, but this movie is like being a cinephile. Like I was like watching people like on screen and being like, I've seen him in this place. I've seen him in this place. This movie is like filled with like character actors that I feel like you don't know unless you're a cinephile. So like for a cinephile, this cast feels like a wet dream.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I have literally no response to that at all. Yeah. So the movie, just to kind of set the score.
See what you did there.
Yeah. The movie starts off with a flashback. Nicolas Cage's character has a mustache. It's beautiful.
Which before you go any further, were you mad that like his character didn't have a mustache for the rest of the film?
Fact? Yeah.
I was so mad.
Yeah. I was mad that he had nothing. You know, like even as the movie went on, he didn't seem to grow facial hair. That's just unrealistic.
Yeah, like all the pictures that I had seen of this movie
was the mustache.
Screw editors.
Man.
And we were given this mustache for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, if that.
Yeah. Maybe 7.
And I don't know if it was real, but it didn't look bad at all. But anyway, yeah, so he's some sort of like bounty hunter or something like that. And he's collecting debts and killing people. Just kind of a classic violent Western intro.
Sure.
And that's the flashback, and then it goes to 20 years later, and his wife is hanging laundry, and so he's married, he has a kid, and that's kind of where it picks up. He takes his kid into town, works at his store, and while he's gone, these men come into town or come to his house and kill his wife.
Yeah.
Which is an oversimplification, but I'm not trying to like give you the movie either.
Yeah, I think like getting the chance to like actually like meet this crew, like, and I think this is really funny. This is a Western movie, but the introduction of the antagonist in this movie, who is played by Noah LaGrasse. There's a scene where his wife is like taking down laundry that's been dried. Cage's wife, and the villain just kind of pops up when she like pulls it down, and there was someone in the theater that screamed bloody murder. It was great.
It's awesome. Always go see movies in the theater. Yeah, it was really fun. You know, if I had to like pick apart a character, if I had to be like, this character sucked, it was that guy.
Yeah, so like that's
awful.
That's one of the things that like I feel like one of my criticisms about this movie is that he's introduced he's introduced really menacingly.
Yeah, just the introduction. Yeah,
just the introduction, and then he like mellows out. He kind of almost becomes like a caricature of that guy, like almost like the like Mad TV or like Saturday Night Live was like, how do we write a bad guy and like write him goofy? Like he's kind of like what I would equate to like the campier parts of the film.
Yes, 100%.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
100%. Like he's one of those guys who's like, he thinks of himself as really, really smart, but he's just like making like childish bad calls all through the movie. Wants to get chased by the guy who wants him dead, and that's like his plan is to be hunted by him.
Yeah.
And like things like that. His vernacular is decent. His accent's all over the place. And he's just like, he's the most boyish looking character in the whole film. And he's supposed to be like the leader of this gang and menacing and stuff, and he's just not at all. It doesn't break the movie, I don't think, but it's just. So and I won't even chalk it up. I don't think you could chalk it up to writing. He just doesn't do a good job.
No. So I think also too, like Shiloh-Fernandez, who plays the character Boots, one of the members, he has like this like really menacing presence about him. He does.
I thought that too, yeah.
And I thought when they like first introduced him, because he's like kind of like off by a far.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, they're bringing this guy in. Like LaGrosse is going to be the decoy guy, and Fernandez is going to be the villain.
Yeah.
And it's swapped.
Yeah.
And I was really let down because Fernandez is. He was one of the actors in the Evil Dead remake. And
wow, I haven't seen that in years.
Fantastic movie.
So good, so fun. Yeah.
Happy 10 years, by the way.
Nice.
And he just has like a really strong presence about him, and I think he carries that throughout the movie to where like there are definite like the shootout scene where like it's them versus the marshals and the policemen. I think that he just does a really fantastic job in that, to where like you can tell that like there's tension that exists between him and LaGrosse.
Yeah.
And I feel like he is more menacing.
He is. And even
LaGrosse.
in that shootout scene, so there's a scene where they're traveling and you have the marshal and his group of lawmen, and you have like the bandits essentially, and the bandits are up on rocks shooting at the marshal and his lawmen, and like they make it so that like that character is the one with the rifle. He's behind the rock, and he's like picking out people, like more or less a sniper, not using a sniper, but you know. And so they build him up to be more or less the talented one, like the one with guile and skill, and yeah, he's dark featured. He's the first bandit that you see, and yeah, it's just basically it's like, oh, the leader of the crew is the leader of the crew because he's the guy with the cash box and the vendetta, and that's it. And it's fine.
And I feel like that's the problem. It's not necessarily a problem with just this movie, but also other revenge films. Is like that's always the subplot or the motivation for the
Money.
antagonist that I always have issues with. Not necessarily money.
Yeah.
I think it's a boring one, but like also at the same time, like revenge is like such a boring concept to me. Like I like watching those movies. I have a lot of fun with them, but at the end of the day, like they're not high on my list of films that like I want to watch or rewatch. And I think a lot of that comes down to just boring character motivation, and I feel like you get that in spades with his character.
Yes, yeah, you do. His daddy gets killed in the beginning of the movie by Nicolas Cage's character, and he just wants revenge, and that's it. And he gets this group of guys who are very obviously more tough and talented than he is, and manipulates them because he's allegedly smarter.
Yeah, so so Lacrosse surrounds himself with just an amazing group of people who include the ever talented Superman of character actors, Clint Howard.
Yeah,
plays
so
Eustace in this, and he was probably my favorite part of this movie outside of Cage.
Cool.
I loved his character. Like he was clearly the oldest of this crew.
Yeah,
but like he understood the threat that Cage posed.
He was like he was the coward, but he was also not dumb.
Yeah.
And
I really liked that, and like you could kind of like also see like clearly he was kind of the black sheep of the group.
Yeah, you could.
The obvious scene being where they're like all watching at the end of the movie. They're all like taking shifts, and like he ends up like having to like stay up all night essentially.
Yeah.
While like keeping guard.
Yeah. But anyway, we can talk about the bandits. They're fine. They're like a third of this movie.
They are.
We got to talk about this kid.
All right. So Ryan Kira Armstrong is the actress's name.
Mm-hmm.
I had a love-hate relationship, I'm not going to lie. I feel like she is the most developed character, like you said, but I feel like her performance never really rises to that development in certain sequences.
That's the point, though.
I don't know.
I understand, like, if you're looking for a climax,
I'm not
Westerns aren't for you.
I'm not looking for a climax.
Yeah. I mean, I just think that, like, a lot of times Westerns, and for their betterment or for their shame, sometimes they just kind of peter out. There's not always this giant party hoopla. Like, they're just kind of interesting in that way. I could be wrong. Please tell me on the internet I'm wrong. Yeah, she just... So Nicolas Cage's character, you have to understand, is like, I can't overstate the fact that he's stoic enough. He is just... Like, at first I was underwhelmed. At first I was like kind of bummed because this is Nicolas Cage, and he's like outgoing and ridiculous, and people know him for like A, B, C, and that's what people know him for, right? And he's almost wooden in this movie, which I would hate to describe Nicolas Cage as a wooden actor. He's not, but like he's so stoic just from beginning to end. And they write his daughter to basically like, oh yeah, she has the moral compass of her mama, but she has the personality of her dad.
I wouldn't necessarily say that Cage's performance is wooden.
I wouldn't either, but I thought so at first.
It definitely develops.
Yes.
And I feel like there's a part of him that the reason that he is that way is because he has this past.
Yeah.
And, maybe like the reason that like he changed is like, hey, like his mama made him a good man.
Yeah, his wife, yeah.
Or, there's a number of other reasons, but like I always think that, one of the things that like I thought about is like the reason why his character is the way that he is throughout the first, act of the movie is like what if it's shame? Like, what if he's ashamed of his past? And
Yeah, but like if in the campfire scene, he like explains his past, and you can tell he's not.
yeah, but we don't know that coming into this movie.
You don't. Yeah,
so
that's fair.
So like because I know for me, like when I do something that like brings like shame, like I get stoic.
Yeah,
I shut down.
that's fair. Mm-hmm.
And I think that is kind of also the way he could be.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, I also think another reason is just because you look at like men from that era, you know, that men don't really kind of talk about their mental health. They just kind of shove it down, and they have to provide for their families. And that was kind of like, to a degree, like I still feel like we have a tinge of that now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of gone away for the most part. But like also at the end of the day, like I still feel like you have some of that. And I think that like that's kind of at the end of what he also like did. And so like I think it could be one of the two, like maybe it's shame, but also maybe at the same time like maybe it's just that's how men acted in that era.
Yeah. I had that thought. I thought at the beginning of the movie that he was just very like, he's one of those guys who like whether it was shame or not, he knew what his past was, and he felt it better to just kind of be the kind of man that takes care of his family and listens to the advice of his wife, because he thought that would just be good for him. You know?
And I mean, like, also, too, like, we don't know what happened in those 20 years.
True.
We don't know in those 20 years, like, how long, like, you know, they were married, you know, how long she'd met. And I also think, too, like, maybe you're right. Like, maybe, like, you know, he wanted to be a better man.
Yeah.
You know, maybe he had, like, this, like, breakthrough where it's, like, kind of almost like, I don't know if you've seen it, but, like, John Wick, I think, is another great example where the character of John Wick,
sure,
you have this, like, just absolutely, like, terrifying assassin and hitman that essentially, like, gives up that life for love. And it could be, like, that's kind of almost that same exact concept for Cage's character, where he's, like...
He knew he couldn't have both.
Yeah, he knew he couldn't have both, and, like, he pursued the one that he had.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many things to talk about.
So, with, like, going back to, like, his daughter.
Yeah.
And, like,
yeah, I was gonna say.
I think that, like, to a degree, like, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I just, like, there were emotional parts in this movie that I felt like she needed to pull herself more into, and I never feel like she just kind of, like, raised, like, you always could tell that she was trying, but it, like, to me, it never clicked with me the way that, like, other child actors were, like, coming off of, like, Megan and some of, like, the emotional beats that movie had with Violet McGraw's character. I was just blown away. Like, A Quiet Place is, like, another one. So, like, I think we're living in this era now of child actors that, like, have kind of, like, spoiled me as a viewer. Like, I feel like Stranger Things is another great example where you have, like, really just transformative performance. Yeah. And I just never felt like I got that with her.
I think that's the point, though.
You think so?
I do. I think that's the point, because, like, so a lot of this movie, I don't want to say it culminates, but, like, the part of this movie that makes this movie make sense is a campfire scene when, you know, basically Cage takes his daughter and takes her on the road to go find her mama's killer. Basically, there's a marshal there and his team of guys and stuff, and they run into them at X, Y, and Z. But they're sitting around this campfire, and the girl's just asking them questions, just about, like, you know, like, were you sad when Mama died? Like, things like that. The sheriff talks to her earlier in the movie, explains how her daddy was a bad man and all this stuff. And her mom, she's, like, rocking on a rocking chair on the porch as her dad, like, 10 yards away from her, is, like, burying her mom, and she's just, like, not crying at all. And so anyway, like, this father is just opening up to his daughter. And he's just like, I've always been different. I didn't cry. My mom always said I didn't cry as a baby. You know, other boys, they would laugh and play and have fun, get hurt, cry. I never did any of that. I had to fake it to some extent, but, like, that was never me. And what it all came down to is like, I never feared. And he's like, so when I met your mama, I felt something. I finally felt something. And what I felt after basically admitting that he was almost emotionless, not robotic, but just, he just wasn't moved.
He like, not to cut you off, he calls himself dead inside.
He does. Yeah, you're right.
During that scene.
You're right. And I think that's just because, like, he felt that other people defined themselves, or culture itself was defined by the way you express, and he didn't express.
Yeah, and like it's that sequence actually is a callback to like a previous conversation that they had. I don't know if you call it that, but there's a previous. I think it's when he's walking her to school, and he's like, you gotta fit in. You know, you gotta basically
That's
like
right.
he's like talking to her and stressing the importance of like social cues and like socializing.
Yeah.
And you know, you have to do it because, like, well, that's what people want you.
You want to survive in the world.
Yeah.
He basically explained it as like a means of survival, which is really like what he taught her throughout the movie, was like how to survive. And so that was just kind of him trying to explain that on an emotional level. But anyway, he was just explaining that, like, when he met his wife, he felt afraid. He was like, I was scared. I was scared that she'd leave me. I was scared that she wouldn't love me, you know, and that's what changed him about her, was that, like, he finally felt something, and he knew that he wasn't dead inside. He knew that, and so she, in a way, like, you could intuit that she gave him life, so to speak.
You can, and I think that scene is pivotal, and that's kind of what like made me like kind of start to question her performance in this. The daughter, yeah. Like I didn't quite, I connected to her, and then like it felt like from that point forward, everything kind of connected a little bit more for me.
Right.
But there's immense like disconnect and I think probably like one of the most like Nicolas Cage sequences in this is
Air
like
quotes.
You you talked about like how like people like come to Nicolas Cage movies expecting the A, B, C energy. Yeah. He's trying to like teach his daughter how to like serve as a decoy so that he can rob this man of his horse. Mm-hmm. And he's like describing that he has this monologue where he's like describing how basically like one of their like friends like had a baby and he was like imitating it and he was like wah wah, and it's that particular scene that when she started doing it, it was probably the moment that made me like cringe the most in this movie.
Yeah, me too, but I think that's also one of those things where it's just like, this girl is, for one, sheltered, and for two, has her dad's personality.
I mean, Nicolas Cage still made a pretty good baby.
Yeah. And that scene was cringy and it was awkward, but it was also just like, I think that scene was that way that it was to show you that like this girl is her father's son. Her father's daughter. She doesn't like know how to express, how to emote. She doesn't have that. Sure. Very early on in the movie, he points a gun right at her while she's sleeping. She wakes up, looks at him stone-faced, and goes, "Mama wouldn't like you pointing that gun at me."
Which,
like, and it's just like, she knows how to like get to him, but she's not gotten to by him.
Yeah, and I enjoyed that. Like, I feel like I enjoyed their dichotomy.
Me too.
Throughout the course of the movie, I think that like it provided an emotional connection to where like I legitimately thought that like he was gonna shoot her in that moment.
Yeah, me too.
And I was like, all right, this is a Nicolas Cage movie. And then it somehow turns into this like this like weird Iron Man like 3 like adult child buddy cop kind of thing.
Why would you reference that awful movie?
Look, man, I like that movie. Ugh. So continue.
Anyway, I don't know. I think they developed her to just basically be her father's daughter, to walk in his footsteps, to kind of help for them to kind of like explain each other.
They do end the movie to prove your theory to where like she essentially becomes her father.
Right. Exactly.
And like kind of carries out like his legacy. And so like from that perspective, like I'm like, all right, like I can still, but like again, as I've said throughout the course of this episode, I have a love-hate relationship with this movie. I think with her performance in this.
We can beat this to death if we'd like. I think for a 12-year-old girl in this kind of movie, in this setting, I think she does an incredible job. I think like I'm almost more impressed, or as impressed, I'll say, as impressed by her ability not to emote than I am about other child actors' ability to be emotionally expressive. Fair. You know, and I think that like watch the movie. I think she's a gem in it. Of course, I also think there's some meh characters in it too, so she just kind of stands out by proxy.
Watch it for Clint Howard.
But but it's great. But I think that she like, yeah, I think she's worthwhile, and I think that Nicolas Cage, like, can't say enough about Nicolas Cage.
Well, yeah, this is Nicolas Cage's, like, I don't want to say it's like his best performance, but this movie, like, Nicolas Cage definitely brings it to this movie. He definitely, I feel like, rises above every other performance in this. I would say, with the exception,
maybe not hard to do. But
with the exception of Clint Howard, I'm not gonna say like he outshines Clint Howard, but like Clint Howard's like a close second.
Yeah,
and I really want to see a movie with like them two like just going crazy because Clint Howard can play crazy so well.
Yeah, and Nicolas Cage is, everybody thinks of crazy when they think Nicolas Cage.
Like,
yeah, and that's another thing too is like we love Nicolas Cage. We're biased. It is what it is. So I'm just going to say this without shame. But I think this movie like really, really showcases his range because you don't get the caricaturized Nicolas Cage. What you get is like, it's almost like he's really, I know, I've seen Nicolas Cage talk about just as an actor allowing himself to be influenced. And I really think that with this movie, like, it seems like he really went back to a lot of Clint Eastwood and kind of like his kind of stylings, and it really seems like he kind of channels a lot of Clint Eastwood, where he's just, people talk to him, he doesn't answer. He's real stoic. He's real matter of fact. He's real just get the job done kind of thing. And it's so even keel, and it's not boring, but you might be tempted, especially early on, to think so.
Yeah.
And it's just great. Again, like, the dude has range. He has the ability to just pull so completely back, and still make you understand a character.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about some trivia.
Sure.
And some mental health.
Cool.
So, do you want to enter the sad door or the nostalgic door?
The sad door.
You want to enter the sad door first?
Yeah.
All right. So the armor on the chute was Hannah Gutierrez Reed, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that last name. She was blamed for a number of unsafe activities by the assistant director and Cage, and was nearly thrown off the set. She was the armorer on Rust and is being investigated for the deaths of 2 people on that set for unsafe firearm handling. So if you don't know what Rust is, Rust was that big, is that indie movie that I think it was like a year ago at this point, but it's with Alec Baldwin. Alec Baldwin's character accidentally like shot another actor, and the actor died for real. So it's kind of like Brandon Lee.
Yeah, Brandon Lee, yeah.
And so she was associated with this and caused a number of unsafe consequences on this one. So it is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So the nostalgic door.
We only get 2 facts?
Well, there's 4.
Okay, cool.
And one of them this is Nicolas Cage's first traditional Western.
Yep, sure.
And then 2 of them are the same exact fact.
Oh, okay.
So Noah Lacrosse, the bad guy in this movie, also played Nicolas Cage's son in A Score to Settle, an episode we did last year.
Wow. Yeah. I did not realize that. He looked familiar. Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So,
yeah.
I feel like this movie, like, there's so, like you said, like there's a lot to unpack with this movie, and especially in terms of like mental health, because there's grief. And I don't know if like there's one moment that spoke to you, but there's one moment in particular that spoke to me is when you brought it up when you were talking about like the daughter's performance, about the marshal kind of like recounting to his daughter specifically about Cage's past and kind of like the two of their histories. And he basically talks about like how her mother must have been a good woman to kind of take a cold-blooded killer and make him a family man, basically domesticate him.
Yeah.
And I that really spoke to me because I feel like, especially like growing up in the church, like you always feel like you're never. I've had conversations where people like never quite feel like they're good enough, or that they're you always feel like they're too far gone to experience things like love or grace or patience, and or that they don't, that like they need to suffer with like depression or like suicidal thoughts or like self-harm. And
like that's their lot.
That's their lot. That's exactly where they need to be. And that's just spoke volumes to me, because I was like, man, it's like I've definitely been in that headspace to where it's like, like even I'll be honest, like there have been several times in my marriage where it's like, how can my wife love me?
Yeah.
And
I hear you. Yeah.
Like, I've even like, I felt like unqualified at like even my day job, and to where like I confronted my boss and it's like, I don't know what I'm doing sometimes, and I just feel like I'm going to be fired at any point.
Sure.
And I feel like scenes like that, like, you hear redemption stories and you're just like, man, like, not only did like he give up this like life of violence, but like he created a family, he created an honest living. And I feel like that speaks to the value of mental health, and like to specifically to like someone's value, because like you go through those like feelings of like depression and you're like, man, this is the best that I am, and you don't believe that the best is yet to come. Like, hold on, because it gets better. Like, you're not the season that you're currently in.
Right.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah, totally. I think like something that stuck out to me actually was kind of during that scene where the marshal was talking to her, and it was that same sort of thing where like, your mama must have been a good woman because she turned a bad man into a good man. And he talked about how he killed men and stuff like that, Cage's character in his past and things like that. And the daughter asks, again, like I personally think all or most of the best dialogue in this movie is by her, which is why like maybe that puts a little bias, maybe I'm a little biased toward her character because of the dialogue alone. But she asked a very poignant question. She was just like, Mama's dead. Is Daddy still a good man? And I think a lot of the movie is like you as an audience member trying to figure that out. And one of my favorite scenes, he finds like the marshal and his men like kind of shot up on the road. And the marshal, and previously in the movie, hadn't told him the names of the men that like had killed his wife, and he'd asked him for him, and he was very upset about well, as upset as he could be about that. And so one of the guys got shot in the shoulder, and the bullet was still lodged in him. And so the guy was like sitting there, and he had him like tied up, and he told his daughter put the stick in his mouth, and she put the stick in his mouth, and like he had been sharpening a knife very incorrectly, I might add. He had been sharpening a knife, and he goes to start cutting this guy, is what it looks like. And the marshal's like, he just yells out the name of the man, and Cage just like looks at him, and the marshal tells him all that he knows, and he doesn't react. He just looks back at the guy and keeps cutting his arm, and like the marshal's kind of freaking out. The guy's like yelling in pain, and Cage like pops the bullet out, takes pulls his skin together, has his daughter take like a hot iron and cauterize the wound. And it was just one of those things. It was just like, he was not trying to get information. Like, he was content, not that he didn't want the information, but like, he was content doing what he was doing without it. But he was nevertheless, even though he was going to take this guy's horse, which he said he'd leave tied up at the edge of town, which he did at the end of the movie. Yeah. He's like, I'm no horse thief. He saved this guy's life. I mean, made sure he didn't bleed out. He mentioned something about the bullet being poison, which I don't know. He came to that conclusion. But anyway, like, movie's not flawless, okay? But it was still just like, you really ride this tension, and I feel like that's something you often get with revenge stories, is you ride this tension of like, is revenge justice? No. Is the person who wants revenge someone who respects justice? You could probably argue yes. Yeah. Does the desire for revenge make somebody a bad man? That's a moral thing, and you can argue morality forever. I don't want to get into that, but it's still just like, I loved her question. I loved the daughter's question at the beginning, where it was just like, Mom's dead. Is Daddy still a good man? Because she needed to know, like, she needed to know if she needed to expect a paradigm shift, who her dad was. She'd never seen her dad hold a gun, and then like 20 minutes later in the movie, he's teaching her how to shoot one. And stuff like that. And I thought that was really poignant and really cool, and just like one of those things where it's just like, man, like, your past can really, really suck. Your present can be riddled with struggles, but like, what defines you? What are the people around you who are close to you, who care about you? Like, what's their perspective of you? That kind of thing is just like, I don't know, just thought about that.
Well, it's not just that, but like, I think it also like, it goes to the value that like one person seeing value in you completely changes.
Yes. Like,
you talk about a paradigm shift, and there is that with, Cage's wife and him. Mm-hmm. And then even after, like, he has every reason to like resort to the old self that he was, this
the
like
old way.
Cold, murderous, hateful man. Mm-hmm. And because his daughter retains the person, the good of
her mother,
mm-hmm. You have that. You still have that. Like, she still sees it in him, mm-hmm. and you see that several times throughout the course of the movie. To where, like, here you have a guy that, like, and I have never known anyone that has like gone through like the vengeance cycle,
right?
If you know someone that has, I would love to hear.
Most people don't do it on like a bloodthirsty level.
They're like, I would love to hear their mental health journey.
Yeah.
So tweet to us at Victims and Villains. But I think also too, like, I think this is a great example of like, all right, this is something that obviously is, like showing the redemption. Mm-hmm. It's keeping it, but like, I think it also, like, one person seeing value in you, like, has a ripple effect in your lifetime.
Yeah, totally. And I think like the girl sees value in her dad, but at the same time, like, the dad, a lot of the way that she's conveying that is continually reminding the dad of what was more or less became his moral compass, and that was the mom. And so like she's always the reason that he is teaching his daughter how to survive. Granted, he's teaching her how to like shoot and kill and stuff. Like, sure, but that's also like what he knows.
Yeah.
It's what he knows, and I think that like you could basically infer that like it's what he knew before his wife, and his wife is gone, and now like it's not like he's backpedaling. I don't want to like make it that simple. Like wife equals good, not wife equals bad.
It's definitely complicated.
Yeah, but like, but nevertheless, he goes to his instincts.
Yeah,
and that is the position from which he teaches her.
And I think also too, like that makes it such an interesting dynamic that they have, because like he is like, you kind of feel like, I don't know if you felt this way, but like I definitely feel like he's definitely awkward as a parent while she's still alive.
Yeah.
But then like once he kind of has to revert back to they're trauma bonded now.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically.
And so like
I kind of hate how simple that is, but yeah, you're not wrong.
They're like essentially like, the death of a parent, the death of a spouse, like, it played a significant part. So now they're both grief stricken. They're both trauma bonded together.
Yeah.
And I think you kind of get to see that they're closer. Like she's still his moral compass.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, like he's definitely like also teaching her like how to be independent.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the thing. And you see from the very beginning of the movie, very like second scene, I guess, technically, where like the wife is like, walk her to school. And he's like, I got to get to the store to open the store. She can walk alone. And she's like, no, you need to walk her to school. And so there's that tension of like what he considers good and right, or at least permissible and acceptable, and what she does. And so he goes with what she does. Whereas after the fact, after she's gone, he no longer has that. So he gets to parent. I mean, it's unfortunate circumstances, but nevertheless, he gets to parent, teaching his daughter, treating his daughter like the capable person that he knows that she can be.
Yeah.
Not like the child, like the dress-wearing child that his wife would rather have her be. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but there is, I personally think, something wrong with not treating a child like they can be an independent person.
Yeah, it's really interesting because like that dynamic that this film explores with the whole like two different parenting aspects is kind of how like I feel about like family or like children's entertainment nowadays, where like you go back to like movies that like we grew up on, whether it's like Mighty Ducks or Good Burger, Max Keeble's Big Move, Snow Day. You didn't grow up on those?
I mean, I did, but like you spanned like such a length of time.
It's 10 years. Stay with me. And like you kind of see like how there's like, I don't want to say like there's this independence that the kids have, where it feels like nowadays a lot of like there's been a paradigm shift where you're seeing like parents are definitely a lot more like the mom in this.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of getting to see like that there's good and bad in both of those. And I feel like
I agreed.
I mean, we're not parents, like
totally.
we're
not parents, but we are siblings.
Yeah.
And I think that like that gives us a pretty decent view.
Yeah, and like I don't know, I feel like for like my sister and I, like we were raised kind of more about like the lengths of like the mama. And then, like, we kind of, like, as we got older, like, it kind of was, like, more like Cage.
Yeah.
And I feel like it definitely kind of, like, allowed that, but you don't get that here because, death. So.
Yeah. No, definitely, like, there's an obvious paradigm shift. We've addressed that. But, yeah, that's something that stuck out to me as well, is just, like, the mom treated them both like one way.
Yeah.
And then when she was out of the picture, it like freed Cage up to parent his daughter in a very capable way. Maybe not a morally, north way, if you will. But I don't know. I just thought it was noteworthy and interesting because it is.
All right. Is there any other thing you want to talk about?
Not really.
This movie?
We barely talked about like the marshal and his men and things like that, but I don't really think that they are much more than a plot device. A good one. They're not bad.
No.
But
exposition at best.
Yeah. I don't know.
All right.
I don't have anything more.
Is The Old Way worthy of high praise?
It's one of those things where like sometimes the heads or tails option of this podcast is very simple, and I'm thankful for it. But sometimes I'm just like, I guess it's worthy of praise, but high praise? Like, and it's one of those movies where like, if it's worthy of high praise, it's because of Cage and maybe in the Cage and the daughter and really not much else.
So I'm gonna say it's not worthy of high praise, but low praise.
Okay.
I don't quite think it's a flat out no, but I don't think it's worthy of like this is like up there with like adaptation and
sure. Yeah, it's no accomplishment. At least not for a Cage film or certainly from a Western standpoint. But it is his first traditional Western. I don't want to ignore that. And it's well written. If not well executed.
So I will also like say this as well, that like this is a movie that I also feel like if you watch this movie one time in your life, I feel like it's worthy of high praise. But I feel like on like subsequent repeat viewings, it's like it's not.
It might go down.
Yeah,
the Marvel treatment.
Yeah, I feel like this movie like just doesn't have a lot of like depth to it.
Sure.
So with not having a depth, I feel like it's not like a whole lot. But
yeah, I see that's interesting because I feel like we went pretty deep with some of these themes. But
sure.
Yeah. But also like, is your mom alive?
My mom is alive.
My mom's alive too. So like, have you ever really wanted to revenge on somebody?
No.
Me either. So as audience members, we maintain a lot of neutrality.
Sure.
So I don't know. Could be different.
All right. Well, I know that you would like this, so I just got to dust off the Rorschach rating scale.
Yeah.
All right. So let's go. Since this is a new release,
are we just doing 0.5s or are we doing like quarters?
You can do quarters if you want.
Okay.
So what would you give this one?
Man. I'd probably give this movie a 2.75.
I'll go flat 3.
Sure.
I think it's.
I'm surprised you did more than me. I'm very surprised.
I really enjoyed this movie.
I did too.
I think I came in with really low expectations. I was really pleasantly surprised by the writing, the score, Cage's performance. I didn't know Clint Howard was in this movie. Sure. I think I can't remember his first name, but Fernandez, the guy who played Boots, did a great job. Had a love-hate relationship with the daughter. Yeah. But I think overall, like this was a fun film.
Sure, it was. I think the pacing was good. I can't say enough about the score. I liked Cage, but he does have to grow on you. I like the daughter. I think she didn't have to grow on me, but I think that she very evidently has the best progression. But I think there were way too many characters that were either throwaway or didn't live up to their potential. Yeah. And like I said, I wanted a movie to be an immersive experience, and the color palette and the a lot of the staging and stuff of this movie, the sets were just lost. They just, I didn't think they lived up to that even kind of.
Well, so The Old Way is playing in limited release right now, and it'll be available video on demand and digital later this month. But before we give socials, we recently so our parent company, Victims and Villains, we gave an update on some of the podcasts, and initially we stated a couple weeks ago that we were, for us, like, this is the first episode we've done, I think, in months. So, like, for us, like, we've just been, life has been really busy. We've been also taking care of
holidays,
our own mental health. This had to kind of take a back seat. And so the plan for 2023 was like, all right, what are we going to do? And so we dusted off the microphones for Cage's birthday and the celebration of a new release. So moving forward, what it's going to look like is we're essentially going to come back in, I think for Renfield, it's going to be our next film we're going to do.
Yeah, definitely Renfield. I'd say we may play the month of March by year, but we will guaranteed be back for Renfield. Just go from there.
So you guys will be able to hear from us, bringing Cage every month moving forward. And if you guys are Patreon subscribers, you guys will also get to see the video versions of those before anyone else hears the episode. Moving forward,
video versions.
Yeah, with
you recording
with Renfield. No, not right now. I'm saying with Renfield will be the first video podcast.
It will?
Moving forward, yes.
Cool.
So I'm really excited for this because I honestly, I don't know, I didn't really know where the podcast was until and every time we talked about it, it was always like, well, I'm busy.
Too much is going on. Yeah.
So, and this is a pastime for us. So
it's kind of true. Yeah. We love it. Yeah.
And Nicolas Cage keeps making movies. I think he's got 9 in development right now.
9.
So I'm probably just guesstimating that number.
I was gonna say
but
he didn't release. Did he release anything last year?
Dude, Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent.
Oh yeah, but so he released Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent last year. But I remember in 21, he was slated originally to have 3 movies out in 22, and we only got 1.
So he was originally slated to have out Massive Talent, and then there was 2 westerns he was supposed to be out. So this was originally supposed to be a 2022 release, and it didn't happen.
Sure, barely didn't happen.
Yeah, it barely didn't happen. But I think this year he's got. We have Renfield, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's 2 or 3 other movies.
Sure. Are we still getting that second Western? Do you know?
I can look at it. It'll perhaps be out.
I'm very curious who's doing it
on our thing. So
yeah,
I feel like this movie kind of set the bar semi-high for the second one.
Yeah, oh yeah, for the second Western.
I don't know what the second Western's going to be about.
Yeah.
So I don't really.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the Westerns I've seen have all been revenge in some way, shape, or form. So
yeah.
I don't know. I feel like we're rambling now. So where can people find you online?
Yeah, right now I really slimmed it down. You can find me on V.H.Zest. It's just at V.H.Zest on Instagram. And that's pretty much where I'm at.
You guys can follow me. I'm on Letterboxd at Captain Nostalgia, over on TikTok at Gent Ghostface. It's GENT. And you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, and of course wherever you guys get your podcasts from. And you guys can also find us wherever you guys get your podcasts, because we have our own feed now.
Heck yes.
So until next time, remember to keep on caging and remember the old ways.